Nowadays, there are a lot of people who find it easier to communicate by sending messages through electronic mail, social media, or cellular phones than in person. One reason perhaps is that speaking on a one-on-one basis or in either small or big group is intimidating and even terrifying. However, you should understand that having excellent communication skills can practically help you express yourself clearly and confidently, gain the respect of other people, achieve your goals, and succeed in life. Communication is made for different purposes. The way messages are crafted depends most of all on the sender's intention. So, good morning everyone. This is the group 4 and we are going to report the communication for various purposes. The objectives of communication is to obtain, provide, and disseminate information. It is also to persuade and argue. So, what is communication? Communication is the act of giving, receiving, and sharing information. It is sharing information or ideas by talking or writing, and receiving information by listening or reading. It is basically an interaction between two or more people. The communication serves five major purposes. It is to inform, to express feelings, to imagine, to influence, and to meet social expectations. Now, here is Miss Maravillesa to formally start the discussion about the communication for various purposes.
Here are the three major types of communication for various purposes: informative communication, persuasive communication, and argumentative communication.
So, first, what is informative communication? The main purpose of informative or expository communication or writing is to simply convey information factually. It involves giving than asking. Its goal is to input new learning, enhance prior language, confirm a concept, alleviate comprehension of an idea, or explain a process or procedure. The informative value of a message is measured by how novel and relevant the information is or the kind of understanding it provides the receivers. There are four natures of informative communication. According to Lucas 20:12, providing information usually deals with objects, processes, events, and concepts. The first nature of informative communication is objects. It may include anything that is visible, tangible, and stable in form. They may be non-living or living, such as places, structures, animals, and even people. Second is processes. It may comprise any systematic series of actions that leads to a specific result or product. Communication about processes explains how something is made, how something is done, or how something works. Third is events. It can be anything that happens or is regarded as happening. The last one is concepts. It may consist of beliefs, theories, ideas, principles, and the like. They are more abstract than objects, processes, or events. So, formal situations requiring information communication. In the world outside your school, speakers find a variety of opportunities for giving the following types of informative talks. The first one is the public lecture. As a result of a person's special interest or expertise, he may be invited to give a public lecture to a community group or club. Someone who had an intensive research on herbal medicine, for example, might be invited to give a lecture to various clubs and organizations interested in the topic. Second is the status report. Every business or social group must be kept up to date on its various projects. Periodically, the group will ask an eligible person to give a status report indicating what has been accomplished so far and what plan exists for the future. Suppose you are the committee chair of a volunteer organization that works with senior citizens in your community, and your committee is planning a formal dance for the seniors. You may be asked to give the committee a status report and possible venues of a fair. The third one is the briefing. This is a very common informative speech used to tell members of a group about changes in policy or procedure. For instance, you may need to tell the members of your swimming team about how to order t-shirts for team or about a new layout plan. Fourth, the fireside chats. This usually features a group leader addressing the concerns, worries, and issues at the moment. The principal of a senior high school, for instance, may schedule a fireside chat with the parents of the senior high school students to review school goals and policies. Lastly, the chalk talk. The speaker giving a chalk talk relies on a visual aid such as a chalkboard. As an example, imagine a coach showing the team how to execute the person-to-person category of team defense or a director outlining plans to present a stage play. Next is the organizational patterns for informative speeches. There are 4 of them. And the first one is the chronological pattern. This pattern allows you to explain how someone or something has developed over a period of time. With this pattern, you highlight the importance of each step in that development. The second pattern is the spatial pattern. This pattern allows you to describe the physical or directional relationship between objects or places. The pattern works well with informative speeches about objects, places, people, or any other living creatures. You can best use it to highlight certain locations, areas, or spaces in a particular place. Third one is the topical pattern. In the topical pattern, you divide your topic into subtopics that address the components, elements, or aspects of the topic. If you want your audience to understand a process, use the topical pattern to describe the main features of the process. And lastly, the narrative pattern. The narrative pattern used to retell a story or a series of short stories. It has much in common with the chronological pattern, but it provides a stronger emphasis on the dramatic unfolding of event. So, there are 7 guidelines for informative speaking. So, according to Jaffe, 2010, a common complaint about informational speaking is its being boring. To keep your audience's attention and to be both understandable and relevant, remember these guidelines for producing comprehensible, effective messages. So, the first guidelines for informative speaking is do an obstacle analysis of the audience. Identify the parts of the message that the audience might find hard to understand and work on specific ways to make these sections clear. Also, you have to identify internal barriers that could prevent them from learning your materials. You have to plan ways to deal with each obstacle. So the second is organize the material carefully. You have to state your major points clearly and build on signposts such as next and in addition that can help them identify the flow of ideas. So the third one is personalize your material to your audience. You have to help the listeners see the connection between your topic and their experiences, their goals, beliefs, and actions. If they find the information as personally relevant, they will be more likely to listen and learn effectively. Fourth, compare the known to the unknown. So you have to start with what is familiar to your audience and build on this foundation, showing similarities and differences between your topic and what your listeners already know. So the fifth guidelines for informative speaking is choose your vocabulary carefully. So you have to avoid bewildering your listeners with technical information and incomprehensible jargon by defining your terms and explaining them in everyday, concrete images. Avoid words that could trigger unfavorable connotations which might set off negative reactions in the audience. So the sixth guidelines for informative speaking is build on repetition and redundancy. So repetition means that you say the same idea several times. So do this by developing it somewhat differently each time. Phrases such as in other words and put simply are ways to build on or achieve redundancy. So repeat and redefine the critical parts of the message to reinforce these crucial points in your listeners' minds. And the last one is strive to be interesting. So you have to search for some ways to enliven your factual material. Examples and detailed description. For instance, engage your audience in a conversational manner because they invite your listeners to form mental images as you talk. That's all for the informative communication. I hope you learn and understand the topic that I tackled this morning. And now, let's call on Miss Lapinid to discuss the second major type of communication for various purposes.
Thank you, Ms. Marveliesa. Persuasive communication is the process through which people try to persuade others to change their ideas or behaviors. People who are important to each other are often involved in persuasive communication. Parents influence children, children influence parents, and friends influence one another. Strangers are regularly involved in persuasive communication, such as advertising. Persuasive communication is important in a variety of professions, such as lawyers, salespersons, advertising specialists, public relations experts, and politicians must use persuasive communication. While persuasive communication may not be the central ingredient in many professions, most people need to be able to influence others in the work-related settings. Everyone is exposed to at least 150 commercials on television, according to Lucas 2012. Politicians and advertising salesperson or salespeople compete for your attention, vote, money, time, and support, as do interest groups, fundraisers, and community events. When you talk to persuade, you are acting as an advocate. The more you understand about persuasion, the more effective you will be at using your critical thinking skills to examine the bombardment of persuasive messages you are exposed on a daily basis. You are acting as an advocate when you speak to persuade. Your goal is to persuade your audience to agree with you and possibly act on that view. Your goal could be to defend an idea, refute an opponent, to sell a program, or persuade people to take an action. To put it simply, persuasion is the process of forming, reinforcing, or changing people's beliefs or behaviors. The ability to speak and write persuasively will benefit you in all aspects of your life, from personal relationships to community activities to employment opportunities. It's also necessary for you to be a well-informed citizen or consumer. The difference between informative and persuasive communication is that informative speakers take on that role of a subject expert and seek to facilitate the audience grasp the subject, while persuasive speaker, or on the other hand, play the position of promoter or proponent, advocating for a specific point of view on a topic that they want the audience to adopt. A persuasive speaker not only becomes an expert on the subject, but also goes beyond advocating for the audience to accept a given point of view. He takes a strong stance on a topic whereas an informative speaker, he remains neutral. Again, a persuasive speaker takes a strong stance on a topic, while an informative speaker, he remains neutral. In an information speech about music recording technology, for example, the speaker would introduce the topic by outlining the history of recorded music, while a persuasive speaker would argue for a particular point of view on the subject, such as that sound quality of vinyl is superior to that of digital media. Next is the elements of persuasion. So, persuasive speeches are intended to persuade influence others. As a result, they require more advanced building pieces to accomplish that purpose. One of the first to theorize about persuasion is Aristotle. He argues that persuasive messages are founded on three elements, or proofs, namely ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos. Ethos, this is a Greek word that means character. The speaker is attempting to influence others by using authoritative and trustworthy course or support of the message. Like for example, as a mother of five healthy eaters, I can assure you that introducing vegetables to babies as early as possible avoids fuzzy feedings. Second is pathos. This refers to the speaker's emotional appeal. Pathos can be used by a speaker to evoke the feelings of the audience, for us by displaying photos to persuade them to donate to charitable organizations. For example, imagine your children facing a future without you. Now is the time to give up drugs and establish a healthy you. Third is logos. This entails employing logic to back up a speaker's claim and as a result, persuade his audience. One method is to develop a coherent space that flows logically through his argument, stressing reasoning or including statistics and appropriate evidence, and including or concluding with a powerful conclusion. For example, drug addiction is a disease that develops over time. What exactly do we mean when we say that? Drug addiction develops during these stages of our life, during adolescence and early adulthood. As we have learned from many years of epidemiological studies, this is a graph or a digital presentation that depicts the age at which people begin to acquire a marijuana addiction. Cocaine, nicotine, and alcohol all have similar graphs. The peak in this situation is around the age of 18. If you haven't become addicted to marijuana by the age of 25, your chances of doing so is very minimal. It isn't zero, but it is minimal. Next is types of persuasive speeches. So persuasive speeches cover three types of questions: fact, value, and policy. While the goal of these speeches is to persuade an audience, the consequences vary. This is according to Lucas 2012. So first is speeches on question of fact. A factual question is one that seeks to determine whether something is true or false. The speaker tries to persuade an audience that something did or did not occur, or that event did, in fact, cause another. Like for example, in a criminal case, prosecution seeks to persuade the jury that the defendant did engage in an illegal activity, while the defense argues that the defendant did not. In this scenario, the speaker should offer sound, trustworthy evidence. He supports his claims with examples, testimonials, definitions, and narratives, in addition to facts and figures. His purpose is to persuade the audience to believe or accept that something is true or false, with a focus on reinforcing and influencing people's mind rather than their actions. The organizational patterns for this are chronological, spatial, topical, and cause and effect. Second type is speeches on question of value. A question of value asks for a subjective evaluation of something's worth, significance, quality, or condition. The speaker asserts that something is good or awful, right or wrong, beautiful or ugly, boring or engaging, humorous or serious. All qualitative judgments about the significance of something. Rather than showing anything to be absolutely true or false, it focuses on individual opinion and cultural ideas. It may include a call for action, but it does not demand that political or organizational policies be changed explicitly. Question of value can address timeless issues, such as the morality of war, or more contemporary concerns, such as the use of social networking platforms for personal or ethical purposes. The pattern for developing speeches or questions of value is either chronological or topical. The third type of um, persuasive speeches is speeches on question of policy. While a question of value makes judgments about the topic and promotes a speaker's judgment of the relevance of something, a question of policy asks what specific course of action should be done or how an issue should be resolved or solved. Question of policy may reflect current controversies, such as immigration policies in the United States, or less contentious topics such as getting more exercise. These questions range from the general, such as encouraging democracy around the world, to the specific, such as academic integrity policies on campus. Speeches on question policy ask the audience to take or not take a certain action, or to support or not support a specific perspective. Speakers may ask for immediate involvement, general support for a social or political movement of some kind of disapproval of an idea, or a change in behavior. And that's all for persuasive communication. Next is Miss Luzon who will discuss about argumentative communication.
Okay, thank you, Shine. Now that we have done the informative and persuasive communication, let's move on argumentative communication. So, what is argumentative communication, day class? Argumentative communication, this relies mainly on sound and reasoning. This involves asking why of an opinion that also requires solid evidence to support your opinion. This is also an art of persuading based on reason, on facts, and not on emotions. So, when we say argumentative communication, it is to persuade or to assent to plausibility of the debatable questions. So, ari palang daan sa pangutana nga, why? In this, you really need to give a reason or evidence that supports your opinion or a reason that based on facts. It is also important kasi na when you are in argumenting, dapat kay budget kasi imong ipangyawit and na kay reasoning. The speaker's purpose is to appeal to the intellect of his or her listeners so that they will be convinced. So one of the most important sa aning argumentation kay ang mga audience or ang mga listeners jud. It is also to establish a framework to evaluate competing claims, creates a forum in which individuals can voice their perspective on an issue that provides a structured process for meaning-making and reason-giving. So, muna ang argumentative communication. Nakasabot ra ba ang tanan? So, by the way, the class, if na may questions ba ka, i-comment lang sa chat box ha, and we'll answer that later. Okay, next slide please. So, it is also said that argumentation or argumentative communication can be debating, argumenting, and audience. So, here in debating, this explains or explaining reasons why a certain theory can be considered persuading. So, aning debating, ari na nimo dapat ipakita nga ka-debate-debate siya ang imong certain topic and all you have to do is to persuade. Here in argumenting naman, persuading the audience is to support the speaker. So, for you to win in argumentation, the speakers must also persuade the audience pod. And lastly, the audience. It's the core focus around which an effective debate is conceived and formulated. Just like in argumentative speeches, ang speaker dyan ang ma-persuade sa mga audience to take the side of them or to the speakers. Next slide, please. However, there is a personality in argumentation. Some people would argue out of habit, always need to be right, make a fuss about most trivial things just to cause conflict, and almost always on the defensive. So, kani mga personality ha guys, nakasaway na babunga na ingani mo or kamo ang ingani. These kinds of personality are usually self-absorbed, no? You must have them say with these kinds of phrases like,
you're wrong. Sorry, no offense, but mainga na ba? Unya. And then they often find fault with everything or don't agree with anything you say. And these people, often called as quarrelsome or scrappy or disputations. I know everyone of or some of us here siguro nakasaway na og inganing personality no, nga we have claims nga kabautang sakto ta, that's why we need to be defensive or nara jud nato nga ang always makipag-argue. But however, if you are a debater or debaters believe they have good reasons for the acceptance of their assertions. Najud sa ilaha ang acceptability, structure, sufficiency, and relevance in argumentation. Nasabtan na ba? Next slide, please. So, here are the forms of proof according to Aristotle. The logos, ethos, pathos, and mythos. This is actually only 3 forms of proof by Aristotle, but years had passed na dungagan and mano ni ang mythos. So since these forms I has already explained earlier sa informative communication, di lang nako balikon, but instead these 3 forms of the nature of proof has been studied since the golden age of Greece and has improved through time. While in our time, many scholars have confirmed the presence of the 4th dimension of proof, mano ni ang mythos, which suggests that we respond to appeals to the traditions and values of our culture and to the legends and folktales that embody them. Next slide, please. Here, Lucas 2007 also claims that to avoid defective argumentation, the following must be avoided: the defective evidence, misuse evidence, statistical fallacies, defective testimonies, inappropriate evidence, and defective patterns of reasoning and evidential fallacies. So here in defective evidence, it is an evidence that there is something wrong with it or it does not work properly. Muna defective evidence. While in misuse evidence, evidence uses and any argument may be divided into fact and expert opinion. However, to avoid misusing evidence, we must refer to facts, documentation a claim, and support an argument or reach a conclusion. While in statistical fallacies could be misuse of percentages, pero siya sa defective evidence, but here in statistical fallacies, when we say statistical, misuse of percentages, means, and graphs, and incomplete reporting that suppresses facts. This may occur during to inadequate sample that is used for generalized conclusion. Defective testimonies. This is also called false testimonies, where testimonies aren't true. Mga testimony dili tinuod. Testimony full of perjuries. And inappropriate evidence. This is a false or misleading information. While in defective patterns of reasoning, usa sa ni siya sa statistical fallacies, but here this occurs when the reasoning isn't supported by the data. If ang statistical fallacies kay mga misuse of percentages, means, and graphs, ang masa ni ang defective patterns of reasoning, reasoning that isn't supported by the data. While the evidential fallacies can be either illegitimate arguments or irrelevant points and are often identified because they lack evidence that supports their claim. Okay, that's all for argumentative communication. I hope you learned something, and thank you.